All right, Carol, our last guest for the night, which we are so honored to have, is Andy Wolf. Andy is a documentary filmmaker. He is also a photojournalist at CNY Central. Andy takes a in-depth look at some rich history of the show and memories that it made for thousands of Central New Yorkers. Some of the clips that are in the documentary have not been seen or showed since the aired in the 60s and 70s. His documentary is called The Monster Mansion Memories Documentary. Confused tonight. In the documentary, he talks about Monster Movie Matinee and Alan Milliar and Bill Lappe, I believe. But we'll find out from Andy here in just a second. Anything old horror movies, of course, we love here at Fringe
yes,
Radio.
We do.
So without any further delay, let's get Andy on. Andy, good evening. Welcome to K-Talk AM 630 and the Fringe Radio Show.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Well, we're honored to have you here.
Yes, thank you for being here.
Thanks for making a little bit of time. Andy, I'm a dedicated old horror movie fan. I've said it so many times. It kind of reminds me of a time when times were simpler when I was a kid. Like to talk a little bit about that in your film, but how did you come about? How did you get into filmmaking? How did you get into what you do?
It's like a second career for me. I was actually, when I was a kid, used to do all the Super 8, movies, 8mm films, and had some fun with that stuff. But kind of got away from that, and then started working, in factories and stuff, and didn't like what I was doing. I was like, this wasn't my direction in life, So I. At the age of 30, went back to school, went back to college, and went from the radio television program. And that's where my interest always laid. So it was nice to get back into that, and just went from there. I've got jobs in. I work in news. That's my primary job.
Right.
But I like the documentary stuff. Is something I've always liked to do, and we've done like 4 of them so far. And it's just something that's I've you're talking about paranormal stuff. We produced a local show here in the Syracuse area. We followed around our ghost hunters here, and followed them on investigations, kind of like the ghost hunters on Sci-Fi.
Right.
But we tried to make a little. We made it local, made it a little different. So that was a lot of fun hanging out with those guys and seeing their evidence and stuff. And we had some fun doing that. And then Monster Movie Matinee was something from my childhood. I always wanted to do something on it, and when I got the opportunity, and it's funny how I got the opportunity too, because there was a show that was here on Syracuse, New York, on Channel 3, and I was working in Charlotte in news. I came back to New York State and was applying at Channel 3, and as a kid, I mean, you watch these old horror host shows when you're a kid,
Right.
And to me, Monster Movie Matinee was something that was coming out of Hollywood. I had no idea this was a local program. Really didn't, And it was so well done. And so when I was taking the tour of the station here at Channel 3, my boss, Dean, was showing me the studio, and he said, and here's where we used to shoot Monster Movie Matinee. And I just kind of stopped and I said, what? And he's like, yeah, we shot Monster Movie Matinee right here. And I was just floored because I was like, I thought that was something that came out of Hollywood.
Right.
And how cool was it to come full circle like that when, a kid growing up watching and loving that show, not knowing that it was right here in my,
your own backyard.
My own backyard, yeah. I grew up in, like, the Utica area, but like down the thruway from Syracuse. And so that, I mean, like I said, how cool is that? So I started looking around the station for anything left over because, it had been off the air for a good, 15 years or so when I started there. And, I found a couple things, a couple pictures. I found the title card that they used for the show, and just started, wheels started turning on how cool would it be to make a documentary on something like this.
Well, and and I think, Andy, the old horror host stuff is really. It was intriguing to me when I was young. I'm a Chicago native, and of course in Chicago we had Jerry G. Bishop, he just passed away, and he created Svengoolie, and then Rich Koz took it over as son of Svengoolie, And matter of fact, a guy that's now up in your area, Mr. Lobo, is the one that kind of sent me your way. He said, "Hey, take a look at this, and you ought to get Andy on the program." It's a very small and unique genre that I think a lot of people in their mid to late 40s, 50s, early 60s grew up with. It seemed like every city had something similar. And it was kind of like you said, when you were young, it was kind of cool, and then as you got a little older, it was pretty hokey.
Yeah,
and it's kind of a dying art. It added fun to the movies. It took the seriousness out of them.
It really did.
Yeah.
It was a lot of family time back then too.
Yeah, it was family time.
But there's not much of that anymore.
And there's so the thing too is, like, at least in Chicago, of course. Rich Cause's show, Son of Svengoolie, was always big, but Creature Feature used to be on Saturday nights in Chicago. And while they didn't have a horror host, they had a guy that popped out every now and then with a dirty-looking face and a creepy hat and would say a few things. And I think a lot of stations had, you'd get a little of that shtick comedy thrown in there. And it would kind of, as a kid, at least for me, some of those old movies when I was young, they scared the living hell out of me.
Yeah.
And that kind of took the scariness away.
Yeah, and here in Syracuse we had it started Channel 9 here in Syracuse had Baron Damone.
You're right, right.
Yeah, and he was kind of more like the comedic one. And so Channel 3 started up there as Monster Movie Matinee. Alan Miller and Bill Lape started it, and they went more towards this, not scary, but kind of spooky.
Right.
And they really created an atmosphere. It was like the perfect storm with the music and the sets they created, the lighting. Alan Miller, he was his character, Dr. E. Nick Whitty, was never seen on camera because he was too hideous for the human mind to handle. If you saw him, you'd go crazy, So it was always just his hand you saw. They had to shoot it creatively like that. And Bill Lape was E-Paul, which is Lape spelled backwards. He's basically an Igor-type character. And
right.
Dr. Whitty would always do experiments on him. And it was just a fun way to get into these movies. They just do an in, and they tie it into a movie and wrapped up at the end. So it was really... It got really creative what these guys did on no budget whatsoever.
Right.
I used to love Dracula. That was
the movie.
Well, just the little things. We used to have the one like you did, the same
here in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, the Tales of whatever. I can't remember the name of it.
Right.
It was the old Dracula movies.
Yeah,
it's cool stuff. It's cool stuff, Andy. I mean, it really
is. Really cool.
Yeah, and one of my favorite. Actually, I first started watching Monster Movie Matinee in like 1974. Mm-hmm. And the very first movie I saw has a tie-in to Salt Lake was Carnival of Souls.
Oh, okay, yeah.
My favorite movie of almost all time. That was the first horror movie I saw. They introduced me to the horror genre.
I forgot about that one. That's a pretty cool one too.
Yeah, and that's the first one I saw in Monster Movie Matinee, and it's stuck with me ever since.
It's weird because I forget all of them. You guys are so smart and remember everything, and I forget them.
Yeah, there's a lot of them, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, there's and there is
until I see them again, or I look at the pictures and I'm like, oh, that's what that was. Yeah.
There is so many of them, and there's so I know that a lot of these. There's a lot of, I know with the Comic-Con and all these different con events coming out, and I see that. Now, you're going to be at the is it the Scaricon this year?
Yep, Scaricon, yep.
I mean, with all these Comic-Con or con-type events, a lot of these old movies, Andy, are getting revived. A couple of guys they have a website called the Terror Daves. They've kind of got an encyclopedia of all these old movies, some of the stuff that you've never heard of, and now at least on like Netflix, Crackle is a network that's starting to put some of these old movies on. So the people of today and the young kids of today, hopefully they'll while the stuff is pretty hokey compared to today's movies, it's still cool stuff. It's still fun stuff.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that stuff still holds up. I mean, like I said, I watch Carnival of Souls. One of my other favorite ones I saw on the show was The Thing That Couldn't Die.
Yes.
Hokey as hell, but what a great movie. Plan 9, obviously, the Tingler. I mean, all these great old black and white movies that you saw in these horror host programs are still out there and hopefully find a new audience.
Yeah.
Exactly. One of our listeners writes in for you, Andy. He says, did you ever get an opportunity to, in doing all your research, Goulardi from the Cleveland, Ohio area, did you come across him at all? His name is Ernie Anderson.
No, I basically, was focused here on Monster Movie Matinee, just telling the story here. And it kind of like all fell in my lap because working at Channel 3, Alan Miller's daughter used to work at Channel 3, and she works at Channel 9 now, but I got in touch with her. Actually, what I did was I saw Alan Miller and his daughter at a convention here, and I told him the idea I wanted to do it. And he was all for it. He's like, that'd be great. And that's when he told me about him having these tapes with show clips on, and this stuff has been non-existent because back then they didn't save anything; they just taped over everything.
Right.
So he was on board, and I said that's great. And I mean, it took a couple years to get going, but I wasn't researching all kinds of all different horror host shows across the country because I was just like I had all these elements for this specific one.
Right. Did you have an opportunity to sit down with Alan and kind of go through? I mean, did he? This is a question. Of course, he passed away not too long ago. But in talking with him, and I'm going to order I want you to tell our listeners where they can get this. But I want to see the documentary. I've seen some little different clips and stuff. I've reviewed some different clips. Did he take it seriously, or was it just something fun? I know it seems like a lot of these horror hosts, kind of like down in the Washington, like Dick Deisel down in Washington D.C., Gore Duvall. They worked at these television stations either as producers or managers or whatever. And when they had these movies, a lot of these guys just took these roles for something fun to do. Was Alan kind of the same thing? It's just something he just stepped into to have a little bit of fun?
I think from what I got from Alan and Bill Lape is they both started off in theater. They grew up watching all these old monster movies, and Alan and I remember talking to him. He started off in a traveling troupe here going through theater and then got into radio. So they took it, fairly seriously. Alan was a radio. I believe he was a news director of radio here. Was known for his voice, and Bill Lape did the weather and Bowling for Dollars. I mean, he did all these different shows and commercial work, and this was something they did in their spare time. But they had this passion for it.
Right.
I mean, a passion like And Alan always credited the crew for a lot of stuff. He was like, this was a team thing. It wasn't just me, and he just had to. I think the theater background grounded them in and having some fun with it, but being more like on the serious part of it.
Well, yeah, because again, a lot of them you could tell. I mean, maybe in this case these guys were, but a lot of them weren't professional actors by any means. They just got in there and started. Just started having some fun,
Yeah.
What do you? I mean, do you ever think that we'll see this stuff ever come back again? I mean, do you think the days of this stuff are gone for good, or do you think someday maybe we'll see some? I mean, there are a lot of. I know, of course, with all the paid services, regular TV, and even radio for that matter. I mean, this is what we do here, of course, has been around forever, but it's becoming old hat now with the iPhones and iPads and all the other stuff and the streaming stuff. But do you ever think that we'll see some of these type of things come back again?
I was just wondering, Bobby, because I think on local TV you won't, and that's sad. I'd love to see a local television station do something like this, but I believe there's I've seen people online doing things like this. People online doing reviews for movies, and I think that maybe this new technology could maybe open up something that could possibly take off.
Right.
But it's difficult to get the rights to these movies now,
Yeah.
I think that you do a lot of the public domain movies, and people have seen them so many times that there's nothing fresh and nothing new. So it's hard to. I think it's hard to find to come up with something fresh and new. With these old movies.
What are some of your favorite old movies, Andy? What do you? I mean, do you still make it a point to see? Do you make it a point to sit down and watch some of them?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. Like the ones I've mentioned are my favorites. That's why I mentioned them first, because they're the ones that stick in my mind. And there's so many that I have seen on Monster Movie Matinee that I could never remember names and all that. And it's been so long now.
Yeah.
But I try to watch some of these good old movies like White Zombie and like I said, The Tingler. I just bought The Tingler a while ago and watched it again. The Carnival of Souls and all that.
Right.
All these, it's just there's so many, and of course it introduced me to the the Universal stuff, Frankenstein and Dracula and Phantom of the Opera. I mean that that Monster Movie Matinee brought those and horror host shows brought back these movies from the 30s, so that when we were kids we could enjoy them.
Yeah, it will. Again, that's the thing. I've talked to a lot of people that have kind of, again, we had Eric Lobo on and a couple of times in the program talking about these horror movies, and the older stuff was definitely theater of the mind, Andy. I mean, the stuff today, as I've often said, there was a lot of scary movies, as time progressed. I mean, to me, one of the scariest movies still that I've ever seen is the original Alien. Literally scared the heck out of me. I mean, it was a scary movie. But now you've got all these movies that are coming out, all these horror movies, and it seems like people just can't get enough. Years back, the monster would grab somebody's throat and they'd walk through the curtain, and that would be the end of it. Now you want to, now today people want to see people getting killed and the monsters getting torn apart, and even seeing what they had for lunch that day. I mean, it's like the amount of gore is unbelievable. People just can't get enough of the gore.
Yeah, it's gotten more and more extreme, and if you don't do something like that, if you have a PG-13 rating, people are like, oh, that's PG-13, that's not worth going to see.
Right, right.
Yeah, and it's like, well, no, it could still be very scary. I mean, one of my favorite, scariest movies is The Changeling. And that's all just done with atmosphere. It's a ghost story, It's funny because my daughter and I, around Halloween time, sat down and we watched Lon Chaney, Phantom of the Opera. Right. Silent black and white movie. You know what? And she loved it. She's like 13, and she loved watching Phantom of the Opera. And she's like, we got to watch that again. So, I don't know if maybe not everybody's desensitized to the violence. They still want to see some atmosphere and theater of the mind.
Sure. When you were making the documentary, did you did some interviews? What other things did you guys do in the? What else did you do? Did you put a lot of clips and stuff in there too?
Yeah. It's funny because it takes on a different path as you start. What I wanted to do, and what you think is be a good story, and it turns into something else. I was trying to hold back on the clips as long as I could. My plan was to tease people and be like, oh, there's these clips are out there, but I found that I couldn't hold back too long. I had to get these clips in there early on the documentary because that's what people want to see, and there was no way really to hold them on. It wasn't going the way I wanted to. So I kind of, you can only do so much with interviews and old clips.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we had some pictures. I did some, some stuff in After Effects to try to, in the spirit of the show, there's some effects I did that are pretty, what you would say cheesy looking, but they're done in the spirit of that time period, So
right,
I could,
right.
So I tried to mix it up enough, and what I've got is what I wanted to do, and I found a couple people how the show influenced them. Obviously influenced me I like horror movies, and I'm doing a documentary on it and all that, And, I found one guy here in Buffalo, Joe Capiana, who he's got his own horror host website dedicated to Monster Movie Matinee in Baron Dimone, and he's an artist, a really excellent artist. And he's just was influenced. His art is very macabre and stuff, and it's a direct influence from what he watched as a kid on Monster Movie Matinee.
Right.
And we also in it is Chuck Waltz, who he's big into horror, and he collects. He's a collector, and he actually went out and he found Alan Malaire, and he bought the coffin from him. He bought all these props from the show. So he's got like a little tiny museum set up with all these props from Monster Movie Matinee that wouldn't be around right now if he didn't save them,
Right.
And again, he's just heavily influenced by what he saw as a kid about horror, and because of Monster Movie Matinee. So, we touched on that a little bit, and how how it's just people now from Central New York who grew up on it, like throughout basically the world. I mean, there's comments on the website of Joe's from people from Korea and Taiwan. I mean, they're all around the world. These people remember Monster Movie Matinee. So it had a big influence on people. So we touched on that a little bit in the documentary too, and talked to Alan, and Channel 9 was Tim Fox at Channel 9 was gracious enough to do an interview with us, and he gave us an old Bill Lape interview he did, because Bill Lape had passed by the time I started doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave me a tape that had this interview with Bill Lape it fit seamlessly. I already shot this stuff with Alan, and these guys played off each other, years later. They still are, in tune to each other and somehow, so that's we just explore a bunch of different areas, and just telling people basically how much dedication it took, and for the crew and Alan and Bill Lape to put this thing together every week from 1964 to 1980. That's a lot of dedication,
Did they do it solid, Andy, all the time? I mean, were they there pretty much every week? I mean, was it an ongoing? I mean, did they drop it for a while? Did it come back, or did they?
No. From what I understand, it was every week. If Bill was off, then Alan would just do it solo, and vice versa. But yeah, it was every week they taped it live to tape.
Yeah.
So whatever they got, they got.
Were you able to grab a lot of the? I know with the movies, I'm sure there's probably some issues with the movies as far as the movie rights and who owns them and stuff. Mm-hmm. But were you able to? Did the TV station, or were you able to grab a lot of the clips, a lot of Bill and Alan's work? Were you able to save a lot of that stuff?
From the Bill and Alan's intros and stuff?
Yeah,
that stuff, like I said earlier, Sean Malaire, Alan's daughter, had that stuff on disc already. And I talked to the station about it. And it was like a really funny gray area, because the station doesn't have anything really of Monster Movie Matinee, but Alan had it personally. So I talked to my general manager and made an agreement that he gave me the rights to use the clips for however long I wanted to, and 15% of what we bring in goes to a charity.
Oh, wow. That's nice.
That's cool.
That is really cool.
Because it would cost, as you know, it would cost so much per second for rights to shows and movies. It's like you couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Well,
so that was very generous of him to make that deal with us.
Yeah, that is. That's awesome.
Yeah.
The one thing is, like you were talking about the props and stuff. I mean, that's some cool stuff that it's just good to see that somebody has that stuff. It's really amazing. I've done a lot of, I don't want to say research, but I've dug into a lot of different television shows and movies. And matter of fact, just a week ago, or was it last week or the week before, we had Adam Johnson on. Adam is a aeronautical engineer for a division of NASA, private contractor for NASA, and he put together a book which is all about Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. And talk about an amazing piece of film that was made, at that time. I mean, they talk about these movies. We see these movies that are made today, but I mean, all the models and the props but what was interesting about that, in Adam doing all his research, all the props, everything that was made for that movie, and those props were just ginormous. I mean, the Discovery was a 70-foot long model that was made. I mean, the front bowl, the round part in the front is 3 stories tall. Every prop out of that movie, with the exception of 1 or 2 things that maybe got thrown away and were picked up, every prop per Stanley Kubrick was destroyed. I mean, everything was destroyed. Yeah. And it's really sad. And even some of the old shows like Star Trek, the original Enterprise, it was found in a crate in the Paramount Studios, lost in space. And it's just interesting how it's just good to see that there are people that are willing to pay the money to get these things. They think they've got the ego and they want to be the collector that owns them. But it's good to see some of this stuff is still around.
Well, yeah, and Chuck says it. He's like, he collects horror stuff, and he's like, this was local horror history. He said, how can I not collect this? How can I pass this up? He had to have it because Alan had it all in his garage, and it was getting leaked on and kind of like destroyed a little bit. So Chuck, basically saved it, and luckily Alan took it when the show ended. Alan, I guess, was like, hey, can I take this stuff? And the station was like, yeah, go ahead. They're not going to use it, So he took the stuff with him. So yeah, I mean, how incredible is that? I mean, and the funny thing is, this Monster Movie Matinee, the title card that came up every week. You can see it on the Facebook page, Monster Mansion Memories. It's hard saying Monster Mansion Memories, by the way.
Say that a few times, huh?
That title card, when I started working at Channel 3, they had a room full of all these old title cards like that. It was always locked. One day it was open, and I went in there, and I'm flipping through, and I found that Monster Movie Matinee one. And I just started working there, and I'm like, I shouldn't take this because, I just started working here.
Right.
Oh, wow, God, this is so cool. How can I not, So I kind of like, I'm gonna sneak it out, and, if they say anything,
yeah, exactly,
I'll bring it back,
Right,
You're just borrowing it. It's okay.
Yeah, I'm not kidding you. I think it was 2 weeks later, they cleaned that whole room out and threw all those cards out.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, "Whoa, my!" Yeah, I was like amazed. I'm like, "Thank God, guys. If I had waited or not taken it, it would have been gone." Yeah. And it's just a piece of history for.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
It is. It is history. I mean, now this show, it was on WSYR up in New York State. Was it strictly broadcast on that station, Andy? It had been. Was there ever talk, or when you were doing the interviews, was there ever talk about syndication at all?
I believe they did talk about that at one time. I remember talking to somebody at the station about it, and they did think about syndication, but it never came together, which is sad because the production value on that, for having no budget and just putting things together, it really is one of the better produced local horror host programs. I was talking with Tim Fox in the interview. He's saying, how because at Channel 9 they were kind of like this, in front of black curtains and stuff, and drawing a haunted house on the picture, or put some plastic skeletons up. But Monster Movie Matinee had a casket, it had a fireplace, an organ.
What's that model? When I was doing some research on this, Andy, there's a model. Dr. Whitty has a model. What is that?
Yeah, isn't that great? It was the opening of the show. As a kid, this is how they set the atmosphere. It would come up with that music, and you'd see that. I think the title card came up first, but then they had built this model. It looked like the model. It's a Victorian, almost like the Psycho House, sitting up on the hill, and there was fog all around it, and there's a stone wall around it, and it would come down, and there's a bridge that went across the moat with fog rising, and the camera would kind of like take you across the bridge and then up this hill with these rickety steps and come up to the mountain, up to the home on the hill, and almost like to the front door, then going into the mansion. And it was just this great idea they came up with. They, you know, in the old days, in the black and white days, they just had like a picture of a house. And all of a sudden now they had this thing they could light creepy and have some fog going and have the camera take you on an adventure through the lower part of the hill and up the hill. And it really set this atmosphere. As a kid, you were watching that and it was like, you know, it was a little creepy.
Oh, sure.
Scared
the heck out of you.
Yeah, it was scary.
Yeah, you're like, a lot of people comment on the Facebook page saying they would watch it from behind the couch, or they would, you know, have a pillow in front of their face because these guys had set they weren't not even talking about the movies. They're talking about Alan Millar and Bill Lape characters and how they set all that atmosphere and the spookiness.
Right.
But yeah, Alan came up with that idea for the model, and we actually talked to Fred Zimmerman, who built the model. He built the model. He was a model builder, and they gave it to him, and he just came up with this whole, you know, putting on the hill and finding these pebbles from the lake and making the stone wall, and he created this really cool model that everybody around Central New York remembers.
Very interesting. Now is that, I don't know if you said, is that model still around?
No, that model, that's one of the things that sadly is gone. In the documentary, we have a model that Joe DeCapiano, the artist I was talking about earlier, a lot of people coming to his website were saying they wanted to see the Open, but there was at the time no video of the Open, and the model was gone. So Joe, kind of out of memory, found the model that matched it and made the hill and made a little graveyard on the bottom, and he did his own kind of like recreation of the Monster Movie Matinee Open, and it came out pretty well. I mean, it's at his website, and you know, so that the model didn't survive, but it kind of is still around, you know, thanks to Joe.
Right. Yeah, well, you know, I remember this. You may find this funny, and some of the listeners may, but I mean, I remember when I was a young kid, we had, again, in Chicago, we really lucked out because we had, on Saturday nights, which our friend Durhuff from the East Coast commented on our chat room board here, the opening to our show is Henry Mancini's Experiment in Terror, and the overlay is Marty McNeely from WGN Channel 9 television in Chicago. They had Creature Feature that used to be on, and that was on Saturday nights starting at 10 o'clock, and then they'd show another one at midnight. But in the during the daytime on UHF TV, which back then was, you know, just as popular as anything, Channel 44 WSNS had a thing called Thing Theater and Monster Movie Madness, I think they called it. Again, nothing like Alan did. Any feature, just more of a little bit of, you know, a little pop in with a rebuttal or whatever. But it was kind of cool to see those things. And I posted it on the chat, but for anybody who's interested, if you go to fuzzymemories.tv, that is the Museum of Classic Chicago Television, and you can find a lot of that stuff in there. And I don't know for sure, but I'm sure in some of these other places, the television museums are becoming a little more popular. People are finding these old clips. You know, they're finding the stuff that was saved, you know, sign-offs and sign-ons, and, you know, everything that goes into doing television. And they're starting to capture that stuff, old commercials, and I think that is just the coolest thing, man.
Oh yeah, and I watched that documentary American Scary.
Yes.
And to see all those old clips from on that was just fantastic. Because growing up, you only had your local stations, so you never saw what was going on in other parts of the country. So to be able to see those clips now, what other people were doing, is like, you know, really, it was like a really cool thing to see. You know, Svengoolie, of course, was like really cool. That was some good stuff right there.
Yeah. And Rich is still he's still he's still going at it. He's on MeTV here in. He's on MeTV, which is being shown, I believe, in just about all 50 states.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, he's still. Matter of fact, his show starts. We've been trying to get Rich on the program. His show starts at either 8 or 9
I think it's at 9 this week.
9 o'clock.
It's usually still on.
Local time, and he's still doing his shtick, and he's got a heck of a following. And again, I know there's a couple other guys. There's a guy down in Vegas. That I can't think of his name, but there's a handful of guys that are still. John Dimes is still doing it. There's a handful of those guys out there, and then of course Dick Deisel, who was in American Scary, he's doing his. It's all on the web now, but he's still doing his Count Gord Duvall on the internet.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and the great thing with this was that in 2011. Scaricon was called Syracuse because it was in Syracuse at the time, and we had a panel discussion with Alan there, and Joe Teresi, who did all the set stuff and all the lighting, and he was very important in the show too. And it was just fun to see all these people who remembered Alan and just come up and like, oh my God, it's Alan, and ask him to do the voice and the laugh, and there's these things that people have these memories of. And Alan loved doing that stuff.
Yeah.
He just loved having people come up, and he would always, I guess I was talking to somebody, he would always think that nobody remembered the show.
Right.
So it was kind of sad that he passed before I got it done. And, it was like, that's the one thing that kind of bothers me, is that it would have been nice for him to see it and to know that people still remembered and still loved the show.
Yeah, it's it's a die-in art. I just hope that it would be great to see it. I know like Eric Lobo is still doing his on Roku, and he's on a couple of small television networks across the country and some of the low-power digital independents, and still doing his thing. And he's the one that gave me your information. And speaking of that, why don't you give our listeners, Andy, where can they get your DVD at? Web, and where can our listeners get this?
Well, right now I'm selling it through Facebook right now. The Facebook page, Monster Mansion Memories. You go there, and at the top in the cover photo, I have the instructions and order, and you can order through PayPal, or check. You can send checks to. There's a address there for the Monster Mansion. That's the way I'm doing it now, and I got it in some local stores here. Now, hopefully, I think I might hit Amazon soon and all that too. Right now, just trying to keep it kind of. I'm just keeping it on a local level mostly, but people have been finding out. I mean, I've got an order from Las Vegas today. I get it from Alaska and Canada and Los Angeles. So I've been, pretty much getting hits from all over the country for it.
Oh, very, very good. So if they just do a search again on
Facebook.
Go ahead.
Yeah, on Facebook, it's Monster Mansion Memories.
Gotcha. So now you're going to be at Scaricon. Are you just going to be promoting the DVD there as well?
Yeah, we're going to take some stuff. I'm going to take my pictures I have in the title card and DVDs, and I might have some of Joe's artwork. He's got some great artwork we used in the documentary, and just kind of meet people and hopefully get the word out to some people. It's hard spreading the word. You think social media, people are going to find out about it, but there's still a lot of people out there that you haven't reached yet.
Right.
So hopefully we can get this Scaricon and reach some more people, because I would just love for people who have a love for that show to see this, because when I got the video, the existing video from Sean, when I got that DVD and I popped in and watched it, I just sat there slack-jawed for 50 minutes because it was like all this great old stuff that's like you haven't seen since since the 70s.
Sure.
Yeah, it makes you feel good and brings back old memories.
It does. It does.
Yeah. Yeah, and
It was a simpler time when life wasn't so.
Well, no, it is. It was a simpler time. It was. It wasn't all the cell phones and all the craziness and stuff like that. I mean, it was a simpler time. I would assume, Andy, that with probably some of the older people that get your you got to make a lot of people smile that come across and see this stuff.
Yes.
It is. It's kind of like an old book, you know.
Yeah, and I get a lot of, well, when the people send checks, a lot of times they'll send a little note saying, like, oh, thank you so much for doing this. It was a big part of my childhood. I love the show.
Right.
And so many nice letters. Sometimes I post them up on Facebook because it's like, it just shows how much this little local, horror host program touched all these people,
Now, are you working on any other documentaries, any other films?
Yeah, we're just finishing up one right now on, it's called Game On. It's about the World Board Gaming Championships. Something we found out about a couple years ago, that they, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, they have this big, the WBC, World Board Game Championships. They have this big convention where all these, people who love playing board games get together, and obscure games, but some games like Risk too. But they have tournaments to see, who's number one.
And these are the older board games?
There's board games. I mean, I'm seeing more now, like Settlers of Catan. That just started coming online. But there's stuff called Power Grid. There's one game they play here that we're kind of highlighting called Circus Maximus, and it's basically looks like a homemade game, but it's like this very competitive, gladiator game. And the one guy we follow in that game is very into it, very high emotion, and the top player. So everybody's always gunning for him and trying to get him out. So it was a fun time, and we're actually just finishing that one up.
Very, very good. So you plan on, besides your day job, continue with the different documentaries as an independent filmmaker? I mean, that's got to be a lot of fun. Yeah, it is. There's a couple ideas, but I'm like, I made a low budget horror movie back in 2007 called Mr. Halloween.
I'll have to watch that.
It's
very
low
YouTube,
budget.
Andy, or?
That's okay.
Yeah, it's very low. It's on. It started off on its own DVD. It's being distributed by York out of California, and it's been on some 4-packs. Now it's like on 8-packs, and but it's been in Walmart and.
What was the name of it again, Andy?
That's Mr. Halloween.
Okay, cool.
It's a low budget one. We did it for $6,000.
Well, that's good though.
Yeah, it was. I had some friends and stuff, and we had made a short for his Halloween party he has. And I said, you know what? I bet if we did this as a feature, I bet you I could get this distributed. And we never, they thought, well, I know you can't, and we made it, and we got it distributed.
Sometimes it's those small movies though that make it big. Sometimes, so it's.
Yeah, well, this one's not making.
Well,
this one's not going to make me big.
Maybe your next one will though, so that's awesome.
Yeah,
right.
It's on IMDb. I found it there. So
that's right. Yeah, that's right. And it was made for fun, and people. They hack me up for it because they just don't understand what I did.
Well, that's okay. As long as you're having fun, that's all that matters.
We had fun with it. But there's this whole new movement of low budget because the editing software is cheaper, is affordable, the cameras are affordable. So there's a lot of people out there able to create, feature films. Mm-hmm. And it's actually a pretty exciting time for that.
It is. It's awesome.
And I'm thinking that I'd want to kind of jump in there and do something like that again.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah,
you'll be up at Sundance. You'll be up there.
Yeah, that's right. We'll buy you a drink up at Sundance. But it is interesting. I mean, like at the NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters, and even the CES show, I didn't have the opportunity to go this year, but. There's so many people doing independent films, and now there's people, which I was absolutely blown away, is there's people that are making films strictly with iPhones and iPads and tablets and stuff. And they're doing some unbelievable work. It's amazing what people are coming out with. I mean, there's a huge movement.
Yeah, and it's for me, it's interesting and sad at the same time because I love cameras. I'm a camera guy. I love shooting film, which is dying. But it's so much like, you like to see. I like to work with nice cameras. I'm trying to work with. Find like a nice camera with some beautiful prime lenses and shoot a beautiful picture. And like you said, people are out there doing an iPad.
Everything's getting so small too.
Yeah. It's like
We were involved with the station a couple of years ago, a TV station here in town, and I couldn't believe what the new cameras were like. It was really? Yeah. They're so little. I like the bigger ones too because it makes, I don't know. So.
Yeah, we went to at Channel 3. I work in news there, and we went to the smaller ones, and we've gone back to the bigger ones.
Mm-hmm. Well, it kind of looks weird when you got people coming to do an interview and they've got a little camera.
You got a little Sony
really?
Handycam. Yeah. Although I think Sony just released their 2200 XL or something that is it's got the quality of like one of those red cameras. I mean, it's just it's absolutely unbeliable what it can do.
It's all about it's all about the imaging sensor, how big it is, and they got these sensors now are 30, the size of a 35 millimeter film.
Right.
And that's all your whole camera is how big that sensor is. So
exactly.
That's why these DSLRs have taken off because they got that big imaging sensor. And
that's something at Comic-Con last year here in Salt Lake City we noticed is that in years past, at different events, the guys would come in with the big over-the-shoulder cameras. Now they come in with the DSLRs, the Canons in these big hoop things. And that's the whole, you got to watch out you didn't get knocked in the head. These guys were picking up these big hoop ball things and swinging them around and zooming them in and out. And everybody and their brother had one of these things, and they were doing some amazing work.
It's a big rage, and they look good because you're using a nice prime lens, and it's all about the lens, and and you're getting that nice, there's this nice out of focus depth of field look that it's more cinematic than your normal video camera.
Exactly. Andy, we've got to wrap up for the night. I want to thank you so much for being here and talking about it. Again, it's the Monster Mansion Memories on Facebook. People can go out there. They can buy it from you. And I want to wish you the best of luck at SCARACon. And, again, thank you for taking some time out of your busy Saturday night to share with their listeners here in Salt Lake City your work.
Yeah,
no problem. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Any chance to talk about old horror movies, I love doing that.
Well, we'll get you back on again. If you'll be willing to come back, we'll get you back on.
Sounds great. Anytime.
All right,
okay,
well,
Andy.
Take care.
Have a great
wonderful
weekend.
Night.
Thanks, guys. You too.
Thank you. Good night. Bye-bye.